So happy holidays, everybody. I do want to mention that I'm going to AEW Worlds End, and they have the match card announced for the World's End show. So there's a couple of things that I want to say about this that, I want to give my predictions, but I also want to do a brief, thought process of the match card, like how I feel about it. I do want to say that I give AEW a lot of credit for this card because, first of all, they have 10 matches, and 10 matches is okay. They usually do 13, 14 matches, and two of them are preliminary. So I kind of think for AEW in the future, they have to do shows like Dynasty or even like a major show like Revolution and have less matches, because again, you can't just have shows with 13, 14 matches. More does not mean better, and then when you get to the point of 13, 14 matches, that's too much. So I appreciate the amount of matches that they have. It's 2 preliminaries and 8 matches on the main card, and I also appreciate that they're not shoehorning more matches into the show because once again, it's just not it's just too much, really. Let's have some birthday cake. Let's not put gallons of icing on that slice of birthday cake. The next thing I want to talk about is that I really appreciate the Continental Classic this year, and I need to do a video about that, but it's been very, very unpredictable. AEW has struggled very deeply with unpredictability, and when I look at the 4 people, the 4 finalists, Okada, Takeshita, Kyle Fletcher, John Moxley, there's arguments for all of them to actually win, and it's unpredictable. You really just don't know who's going to win the tournament. So I appreciate them having unpredictability, and then also I appreciate them with the Fatal 4-Way main event. These 4 wrestlers, they've mattered to AEW. They've been champions before. There is some unpredictability, and ultimately they have good. They're the full package. They have good mic skills. Their pay-per-view draws. They actually matter. It's not like last year where it was kind of like a fuckery, really. These are 4 wrestlers that are series champions. They have stories. They can go in different directions with the company, really. So, and then also MJF, I'm predicting he's going to win, but I'm happy he's cashing in his contract, because we cannot have tournaments like Casino Gauntlet and other things like that and people not actually win, because why would I do all that effort as a professional wrestler to participate in the Royal Rumble, Elimination Chamber, Casino Gauntlet, Feast or Fire, and all these other opportunities, Diamond Ring, if I'm never going to become a champion, knowing that other people have never become a champion before. So I'm kind of happy with that as well. So the first match they have is the Sisters of Sin versus Heian and Maya World. So obviously Sister Sin's going to win. Who the hell are these two other people? So that makes sense. The next match is the Conglomeration with Tony Storm versus the Death Riders in a mixed tag team match. My prediction is Tony Storm, the Conglomeration, is going to win because they like Tony Storm a lot in AEW. Even though I think that they're telling a story between Marina Shafir and Tony Storm. They could have a match with each other. So you could see, you see Marina Shafir winning, and I think that would be actually that would do better to build her up as a star, because even though a lot of people criticized her, she's been around a lot. They made her look like a badass in many areas. So I just think that she needs more consistent matches, and more consistent opponents, really. So I think that giving her a shot would be important, and they build towards a story with her and Tony Storm. I think that you have to kind of almost do that before you say that, okay, there's nothing we can get out of Marina Shafir. But I think with all that said, really, I think it's stronger if the Death Riders win with Marina Shafir and Tony Storm going into a feud. But my prediction really is that the Conglomeration and Tony Storm are going to win, just because of 2 things. That number one, they love Tony Storm, and because they just love Tony Storm and a lot of the other people in that group. I also think another factor is Roderick Strong. Is he going to turn heel? But I think if he does turn heel and join the Death Riders, it's what do you do with Roderick Strong? He's not really mattered to wrestling or whatever, really, So it just doesn't do a lot. The next match is Okada versus Takeshita. The winner of this match participates in the main event of the Continental Classic. This is the semifinals, and my prediction is Takeshita. I think for a few reasons. That number one, I think a lot of people want to see Takeshita win. He's kind of he's done a lot for AEW. He's the IWGP champion. I also think that another problem is that if you have Okada win, a lot of people are going to be a little upset because they're going to be like, oh, this is the same old shit of Okada winning. And again, he's been a champion for 500 days. and then he's not really done anything with that title. He's just held it around his shoulders, really. So it just it's just really kind of like stupid in a way. It's like with Athena being the ROH champion. Like, if somebody's holding a title for way too long, it means two things: either that you're trying to make the company bigger and better by having a champion that people recognize, like Hulk Hogan in the 1980s, or you're saying to yourself, we don't trust other people with that title. And you kind of look at as I said, Athena is an excellent example. Like, they don't give other people a chance with the ROH title because they're afraid that's going to hurt other people. Or you may say something like, oh, well, you look at WWE when Dean Ambrose, John Mox was holding the United States Championship for over a year, or Gunter with the Intercontinental Championship. Like, sometimes people hold titles for a long time because their company doesn't know how to book them that well. But I think that it's like, as I said, it's time to say, hey, let's do something different. Hey, same old shit, really. And if you do the main event of Okada versus John Moxley, a lot of people would not like that because, first of all, like John Moxley, Death Rider storyline, that's kind of hurt AEW a lot. And I also think with Okada, it's like the same old shit, really. And then the other problem is, I think Takeshita and Kyle Fletcher would tell the best story because they're friends. It would be really interesting. They can do a match series or something like that after this, like, and then you can kind of just do different directions, really. So I really think that seems to be like the strongest, that seems to be like the most memorable thing, to do Takeshita versus John Moxley. So speaking of which, I'm predicting it's going to be with Kyle Fletcher, John Moxley. I think predicting Kyle Fletcher's going to win for a few things. I think that it does good because Takeshita and Kyle Fletcher are kind of like, the young stars of AEW. And they need to start building up new stars. And I think that, again, Takeshita and Kyle Fletcher are friends, so they can have a match. It can mean a lot, and then they can do something like where Takeshita wins, and then he gets kicked out of the Don Callis family. Or you could do something where it leads to a match series, and they kind of say, hey, you know what would have happened if we didn't have, wrestle two matches tonight? Who's the best of the best, really? And then that can lead to a feud between Takeshita and Kyle Fletcher, and then you kind of can see what they can do with this, because this is like a friend. They're really, really like strong friends, really. So it kind of it does a lot, really, to just really play into that. So I think with Fletcher and John Moxley, Kyle Fletcher's going to win, and then I also will say too, John Moxley wins. I think that a lot of people feel bummed because they're like, okay, John Moxley. His Death Rider thing's not really worked. It's not built new stars in that group, really. You could do something where he loses, and then the Death Riders loses earlier tonight, and then they just talk to John Moxley, then they kick him out because they're like, hey, you know what? You have loser stink on you, and then they take him out, really. And then you make Pac the leader of the Death Riders, and then you kind of have a new vision of that. So I think that that's possibly an outcome, really. Then also, too, if you're going to have the finals of the Continental Classic and you're going to have the Death Riders turn on John Moxley, it kind of does not make sense for the Death Riders to do that after somebody's getting the Continental Classic Championship, because it kind of feels like, oh, you're having two big things in a row, really. But I think that, as I said, the match to have is Kyle Fletcher versus Takeshita, then this leads to a match series, and then like a breakup of their friendship. I think that that's the best way to do it. And hopefully they do that. And I think between Kyle Fletcher and Takeshita, I think Takeshita should win. He deserves to win. He's done a lot. He's a tournament wrestler. This is kind of like saying, okay, you're taking it from the old dog, Okada, and you're giving it to a younger guy. And I also think that, as I said, this sets up a bunch of rivalries and rematches with purpose between, members of the Don Callis family and Takeshita. Like, you have maybe a year's worth of stuff that you can do. And then also, one thing I want to see with Takeshita is that he actually defends the Continental Classic Championship, because it does not make sense for him to hold it around the shoulders for months or defend it every year, really. Like, this is just a championship you hold and defend once a year. Like, that's not what championship should be for. The next thing that I want to say is that the next match is Darby Allin versus Gabe Kidd. I'm predicting Gabe Kidd to win for a couple of reasons. That Darby Allin's still doing this injured angle. I also think that, with Gabe Kidd, again, as I said before, that you're bringing this guy from New Japan Pro Wrestling, and he's this badass. He's kind of like this really ruthless guy. So sometimes it's almost like you have to kind of do a little bit more with these wrestlers. They just can't be there just to lose all the time. You look at someone like Mascara Dorada, where I believe he has a lot of potential, but he loses a lot in AEW. So it's just like you can't just bring people in just to lose. So, and then also too, you can't just have the baby faces win all night. So I think that you can do some unpredictability and have Gabe Kidd win. It would surprise people. It'd be like, oh well, Darby's being buried. No, it's just that we gotta make sure. We can't always just have the winners be. We just can't just make sure we have to make sure that the winners cannot just be the same old people. Something it can't always be the baby faces. Another match is FTR versus the Bang Bang Gang in a Chicago Streets fight, and I know FTR is going to win this because I really think that one thing they want to do is Adam Copeland and Christian Cage versus FTR, and this is kind of like the fuckery match because obviously they like to do hardcore matches, and there's two types of hardcore matches. There's kind of like the spectacle one, and then there's also like the bloody blood and guts type, and this is going to be like the spectacle one. So I really think that this is going to be that type of match, really. But I think that FTR wins. Their story with Adam Copeland and Christian Cage and them hurting Beth Phoenix, and maybe Christian and Adam Copeland going out as champions, going out, retiring as champions, or doing something where they're like, okay, we want to face them, maybe Kevin Knight and Speedball Mike Bailey, like the younger generation or whatever type of thing. I think you to get better story out of that, So I think the FTR retaining is going to be helpful. The next match is the Babes of Wrath versus Mercedes and Athena, and I think that this is a very interesting match. I think that you can do two things. But my prediction is the Babes of Wrath going to win for a couple of reasons. That first of all, a lot of people will be mad at Mercedes win because you're almost running to that territory of, okay, she has to win everything. It's almost like when Charlotte Flair was in the main event of WrestleMania. Like, it should have been Becky and Ronda Rousey, but they threw Charlotte Flair in there. And imagine if Charlotte Flair won. Like, that would have turned off a lot of people. So you may get to the point where you're like, if Mercedes wins, it'll turn off a lot of people because they're going to say, oh, well, this is just, the Mercedes title. Like, this is like the Mercedes Moné showreel. She has to win all the championships. So you have to kind of let the Babes of Wrath win for a while. Maybe in Australia you can have Toni Storm and Mina versus the Babes of Wrath because it's their home country. You have Harley Cameron, and then you have Toni Storm from Oceania. So I think that's the best one. And then also too, I think Mercedes and Athena have to face each other. And I think for Ring of Honor, if you want to do Mercedes winning the ROH Women's Championship from Athena, I think that would be good because I think another big problem is that you're getting to this point of why is Athena a 3-year champion? The problem is, as I said, there's two types of multi-year champions. There's people like Hulk Hogan, Bruno Sammartino, John Cena, Roman Reigns, and other people who do that to build the popularity, to build up a company very, very strongly. And then there are people like Mercedes Moné, Okada, Dean Ambrose with the United States title, Gunter with the international title, Eric Young and ODB with the women's tag team title in TNA Wrestling, or Abyss with the Legends Championship or whatever in TNA Wrestling. Like, the reason why they were champions for over a year with those titles is because they're like, hey, we don't know how to find another person. We just forgot about these titles, or it's just easier to keep it on somebody for a long time. And that be that, really. And Athena just has to get out of that. She needs to be on the AEW roster. She needs to be graduated. And ultimately, like I said, this can't be the Athena show in Ring of Honor because it actually does a bad thing. It's actually diminishing. For example, imagine if Roman Reigns was the NXT champion for 5 or 6 years instead of being on the WrestleMania cards and the roster. Really, it'll be like, okay, why are you keeping this guy on this card? Why are you building up other people? Really, they really need to kind of get to Mercedes versus Athena and take the title off of Athena, because I think it's at the point where it's almost like there's gonna be a point of no return. It's gonna be like, oh, you take the title off of her, or she's gonna or ROH is not gonna draw that much. They're gonna close the company ROH, and then Athena's gonna be stripped of the title, really. So they have to get to a point of Maybe you have the Babies of Wrath win, and then you get to Mercedes versus Athena because they're mad, and then you kind of create a thing where Athena loses her title. That's how I would book it. But I think that's the best direction. I think that, like I said, Mercedes and Athena winning is too soon. It feels like you're just saying, "Oh well, we can't trust the Babies of Wrath," really. So they gotta hold it for a couple of months. The next thing is match of Statlander versus Jamie Hayter. Statlander's going to win. There's really no point to Jamie Hayter winning at this time. Statlander just beat Tony Storm and Mercedes, so it doesn't make sense for her to actually lose the title to Jamie Hayter, because what's Jamie Hayter actually done? I know she's had good matches, you know, and she's been a former champion, but it's almost like, as I said before, and I'll say it again, it's almost like it just feels very, very random. It just feels like really out of the blue. So I really just think that this is kind of like the time to say, hey, Statlander needs to keep this for a couple of months. You can do Statlander versus Marina. You can do Statlander versus Will Nightingale or Harley Cameron in the future. You can do Statlander versus a heel Tony Storm or heel Mina. You can do Statlander. There's talk about the Hurt Syndicate trying to find a woman. So if they have Nyla Rose, and I think they should have Nyla Rose join the Hurt Syndicate, that could be something where she goes after Statlander. There's some longevity out of Statlander that you can have, really. And then the main event is the Fatal 4-Way. Strickland, Samoa Joe, Hangman, and MJF. And my prediction's MJF for a lot of reasons. For example, Samoa Joe, I think for him being a long-term champion, we've already done this. Strickland doesn't really add anything, in my opinion. I think he's a really cool guy, but he ran through a bunch of opponents, and that was kind of about it, really. And then I also think with Hangman, we've had his title run. It just received bad booking. I think with MJF, there's a lot of things. I think MJF, he has a very strong personality, and he can work with any wrestler on the roster. As I said, I think with Takeshita can wrestle anybody and have a great match. MJF can have a great match and a great story. And then one of the big problems with AEW is building new stars. MJF built Wardlow. MJF built Ricky Starks. And then MJF, and that's really about it. And MJF has worked with veterans like Chris Jericho and Cody Rhodes and CM Punk and other people like that, and he's actually walked out bigger and stronger, really. I'm not sure if they ever did MJF versus Bryan Danielson. And then also, last year was kind of like the rise of Will Ospreay, but Will Ospreay versus MJF, that helped Will Ospreay become a bigger and better deal. He went from this esoteric New Japan Pro Wrestling guy to this mainstream guy. So, and part of that was matches, and one of the matches that helped him were MJF versus him. So, I think that you need to build new stars. You need to also say, okay, once we build these stars, we have to be okay, what's the book? How we're going to book them for the future? If you do Kyle Fletcher, if you do Takeshita versus MJF, Bandito versus MJF, Brody King versus MJF, Adam Copeland versus MJF in a retirement match, and other things like that. There's a lot of really great, compelling stuff, really. And this is the time for AEW to really fix its weaknesses. And one of the weaknesses is that they don't have a champion with good booking. And I also will say this, that they really did the right thing. These are the 4 right people to have this match. Last year, I think you had Jay White, John Moxley, and then you had, if I'm correct, you also had Orange Cassidy, and I think then you had somebody else, really. I think it was Christian Cage or somebody like that, but they were so it was such a clusterfuck, really. But I'm happy that's 4 people that matter to AEW, 4 people that have stories with each other in the tag team titles and all that. So and then also, as I said, the Casino Gauntlet match, you have to do something. You really, really have to do something where you have somebody who wins the main title. Same thing with the Dynamite Diamond Ring. You have to do something where the winner wins the title. Because the problem is as I said a million times, it looks really bad. Why should somebody go through a tournament? Why should somebody bust their balls going through a tournament? Why should somebody do the Royal Rumble, Elimination Chamber, Feast or Fired, Money in the Bank, and all that shit if there's been no prior winners? It just makes it look like, well, you're stupid for going through all that shit, really. So I think that MJF has to win. It's the right decision for business. And I also will say, when you look at John Cena and how people did not like his retirement, one of the big things AEW can do as a counterattack is saying, hey, here's our new young star. And we're going to do that. We're not going to keep it on Samoa Joe because, again, with Samoa Joe, again, it's a faction, it's an older guy, and it really says, hey, you know what, maybe I'm just going to go to Hollywood or work on other movie projects. So, he's somebody in AEW that can make AEW better, but he's just riding the money train, really. So let's just hope that they have a really great show tonight, really great show tomorrow, and I'm just really praying that they make a lot of good decisions. I'll tell you guys what happened to me last year. That I went to AEW Worlds End in Orlando, and I had a streak of going to all the shows. I went from All Out 2023 all the way to World's End 2024. But one of the reasons why I chose not to go to Revolution in Los Angeles last year was because of how bad that show and the results were of World's End. So hopefully I don't have the same thing. And then the other thing that I'll talk about is that the year before, you remember, that was the Devil storyline, and that was kind of almost like when AEW, that was kind of like really like the last like universal positivity for the company. After they did the Devil storyline, the company further went into a lull. It was really CM Punk leaving that hit it, and then the Devil storyline also hit it as well, because after that they really had no like really mainstream compelling thing really. So hopefully they do a lot of rebuilding and they do something really great with it. So, and as I said, they have Wembley Stadium next year, and I think that if I want somebody as a professional wrestler to make Wembley Stadium a big deal, out of these four people, MJF is the person. Swerve has great matches, but I don't think he has he doesn't have a transcendent personality. Hangman, we've seen what happened with him as a champion. We've seen him as a champion before, and he doesn't really book himself that strong. And then also Samoa Joe, again, he's an old guy, he's a veteran. It's another faction, same old shit, really. And then the other part of it with MJF is that when they sold out Wembley Stadium, when they had Wembley Stadium, they had 78,000 people. Who was the champion at that time? Who has personality? Who inspires the wrestlers? Who has a fire and a drive to do bigger and better and be on top of the company? As I said, the money's in MJF, really. So hopefully, they make the right decisions. Sisters of Sin conglomeration, Takeshita, Kyle Fletcher versus Takeshita winning. Gabe Kidd, FTR, Babes of Wrath, Statlander, and MJF.